is from Floripa. Great. Tell me more. Where are you speaking from, everyone? Marta is from São Paulo, just like me. Santos, England. That's great. Let me see. Lots of answers. Orindiúva, São Paulo. Hello, Crisley. Mônica is from Cotia. Jaboticabal. Vanessa, hi. Alex is from São Luís. Elisângela from Paulo as well. Viviane from Belo Horizonte. Nice. Piracicaba here, Rio Branco, Rio de Janeiro. That's great. So different places here. Panama as well, Presidente Prudente, Ecuador. That's great. So thanks for joining me today, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Lygia. I'm an academic consultant at Troika. If you're not familiar with Troika, we're a consulting company that specializes in education. So we offer courses for teachers. We also write materials for different companies. We offer personalized mentoring for schools and teachers. And if you become a member, there are lots of benefits for you to enjoy. So click at the top over there so that you can check out our website and learn more about Troika. Let me see, Amanda is saying here, love Troika. Vini Nobre and his whole team rock. Thank you so much, Amanda. So I'm really happy to be here today talking about learning strategies. And before we get officially started, I have a question for you, actually. I'd like to know what strategies you use when you are learning a new language, a different skill. So, for example, you can think about when you learned how to drive a car, or when you learned how to use a new computer program, anything that comes to mind, really. What strategies do you use? What strategies do you enjoy using, and why? You can think about your answer for a little while, and I'll be waiting for your answers in the chat box. Let's see. Paulo is asking me about sending the slides. I'm actually not sure about this possibility, Paulo, but I'll check later with people from Disal to see if this is possible, okay? Lucy Mary is saying here, practice. So this is a strategy that she uses when she's learning something new. Marta mentions theory and practice. All right. Marta Sampaio, I researched first about the topic and interested. Okay. Juanita is mentioning practicing here. All right. Amanda, videos, podcasts. I love podcasts, Amanda. Reading material in general. Rosie Claire, theory and practice. All right. Hello, Maria Cristina. Let's see. At first, watching films, cartoons to get as much vocabulary as possible. That's interesting. Okay. So I assume you're talking about learning a new language here. Akemi, great. Let's see. Tutorials. Talk to people who have experience. debates, dictionaries, video interactions, talking to other people, exchanging knowledge, lots of interesting ideas here. Writing to fix the concepts. This is something I enjoy as well, Cristina. For effective comprehensible output is fundamental, whether it's online or face to face. Okay. More people are also talking about practicing movies, songs. Okay, great. So you can keep on typing your ideas into the chat box, but overall, some very interesting ideas overall. So now that I know a little bit more about how you use different strategies to learn, let me change the slide here so that we can continue. So I think that before we talk about how learning strategies can be applied and what they are, it's important for us to understand what they mean and what we're talking about when we refer to learning strategies. So, when I refer to learning strategies, when I define learning strategies and talk about their groups and subgroups, my main reference is this book, which you can see over there. So it's called Language Learning Strategies, What Every Teacher Should Know by Rebecca Oxford. Now, I don't know if you've seen this book or if you've read this before, but I know that this book was written 30 years ago and that some sections are not so up to date, especially when we consider some developments in learning strategies research. However, I also believe that the strategy system she presents is still useful today, and it works as a nice introduction to the topic overall. So, according to Rebecca Oxford, learning strategies are specific actions taken by the learner to make learning easier, faster, more enjoyable, more self-directed, more effective, and more transferable to new situations. So, in other words, we're talking about actions, tools, or steps taken by the learner. Some of them are observable, but some of them are not, which helps students become better learners and achieve communicative competence. What is also important about learning strategies is that they can be taught. So, with effective strategy training, learners can modify their strategies they already employ and choose more appropriate ones depending on the task. Also, according to Oxford, learning strategies can be categorized into two groups. So, first, we have direct strategies, which deal with the target language directly and involve mental processing of the target language, while indirect strategies help students manage their own learning, and they don't usually involve the additional language directly. So, something else is that direct and indirect strategies are connected to each other. They support each other and they are most effective when used in combination. But what do I mean? What do I mean exactly when I'm talking about direct and indirect strategies? Well, first of all, direct strategies can be divided into different groups. So there are memory, cognitive, and compensation strategies. And indirect strategies can also be divided into three different groups. So there are metacognitive, social, and affective strategies. So what I'd like to do for now on is to talk about each one of these subgroups We're going to discuss a little bit of theory and also talk about some practical examples as well. So you can expect a little bit of theory, some practical applications of each strategy as well. And throughout the webinar, I'll be looking at the chat box from time to time so that I can see your reactions, your comments, any questions you might have, and I'll try not to miss anything. And of course, if you want me to repeat something again, if you have any questions, please talk to me, tell me any problems, any questions you have here in the chat box. So far so good. Can we continue? Let me take a look at the chat box here again. Elisangela, 1 hour, okay? We started at 4 and we finish at 5, okay? Let me see if there's anything else which I've missed. Okay, excellent. Let me see here. Stefania, you missed the difference between direct and indirect learning strategies. No problem. Stefania, direct strategies have to do with students using English somehow. They're manipulating the target language somehow. And there are 3 subgroups of direct strategies, as you can see on the slide. Indirect strategies, they have to do with controlling your learning process, with coordinating your learning process, and they don't exactly involve using English to speak, write, or anything like that, okay? And as you can see over there as well, there are 3 different types of indirect strategies, okay? So let's move on and talk a little bit about memory strategies. Now, these strategies may not seem so relevant at first glance, but it's important to consider that we can only use our mind's potential to store a wealth of information if we employ memory strategies. These strategies can also be classified into different groups and subgroups. We won't have time to delve into each one, but an important principle is meaning. So when we arrange words a certain way, when we make associations between words that we want to remember, or when we review content, everything must have a personal meaning to us so that we can remember it more easily. Now, what is an example of a memory strategy? Well, one example is a semantic map, such as the one you can see over there. So this is a semantic map for hair. So hair is the central word on the map. And here we have other words which can be associated with hair. As you can see, there's no right answer here. So students can arrange the words related to hair in whatever way they prefer to do so. And on this semantic map in particular, we can also see some visual aids. So drawings or other illustrations or images can actually enhance the meanings of the words that we want to remember. Now, if we think about, oh, and sorry, before I continue, something important as well is that students are allowed to cluster ideas and make associations according to what they think makes sense, according to the links which they think different words have. Now, if we think about our lessons, we can ask our students to create semantic maps in class. But can you think think of any stages in our lessons where we can stop and ask our students to create a semantic map? Please tell me your ideas over here in the chat box. Okay, so we already have a suggestion here right after language presentation. Do you agree with Amanda? What do you think about this? End of class, by asking them to collect as much as they can remember of that lesson. Reactions, please, to Stefania's suggestion, everyone. As an instant practice, they may be used to talk about anything, all right, Celia, but let's think about specific stages in our lessons where we can ask our students to create a semantic map. Lucy Mary, we're going to talk about your question in a moment. Don't worry about it. How we can do that in a remote class. As a brainstorming to introduce the subject. Very nice, Cristina, when wrapping up the lesson. Well, lots of ideas here. And I'd say there is no right answer, but I agree with some of your suggestions here. So for instance, before a listening activity, before a reading activity, I want my students to activate their schemata and try to remember as many words as they can related to the topic of the reading text or the listening text. So we can ask them to create a semantic map. They can do it on their own or in pairs, small groups. It's really up to you. Before a writing activity, this would be a possibility as well, before a speaking activity. Some of you mentioned at the end of a class, possible if it's a vocabulary lesson, maybe this would allow students to consolidate everything they learned right before leaving the lesson. It's possible as well. I believe some of you have mentioned this possibility as well, maybe as a warm-up at the beginning of a lesson so that students can remember previous vocabulary. This is also a possibility. Now, I think it was Lucy Mary who asked me about how we can ask students to create semantic maps online. Yes, it's possible to use Jamboard, and this is quite a famous, quite a popular tool. It's also possible to create a semantic map on PowerPoint, for instance. There is that Smart Art button. It allows us to create semantic maps. There are some other possibilities as well. Let me type them into the chat box so that you can check out these other possibilities as well. Oh, Amanda is also suggesting other ideas as well. So Padlet, definitely. Mentimeter, I love Mentimeter. There's also this one over here, Bubblus. I don't know if you're familiar with this one. There's also MindMap and Creately. If you type these words into Google, for example, the first result you see will direct you to these websites. So most of them are free tools. There are some paid versions as well. Some of them are more flexible than others. So what I suggest is that you try out these tools on your own later on and try to see which one or which ones would be more suitable to you and your context right now, okay? We also have some more suggestions here in the chat box. Let me take a look to see if there are any questions. One moment, everybody. So also some more comments about when we can ask students to create a semantic map. Okay, great. And something else which I haven't mentioned yet is that after doing an activity such as this one, after students use this memory strategy in class, it's always interesting to tell students that this is a memory strategy which they can use outside the classroom. So when they are studying by themselves, when they want to memorize vocabulary items, for example, why not create a semantic map in their notebooks or online? Try to make them see that this is a strategy which is transferable to other situations, as we have seen before. Okay, let's move on and talk about cognitive strategies right now. Now, these are quite popular strategies among students. They use these strategies quite a lot. There is a wide range of cognitive strategies, and all of them have to do with the manipulation or the transformation of the target language somehow. So when students practice in different ways, when they analyze expressions, when they summarize a text, they're using cognitive strategies. And as far as I can remember, some of you also enjoy employing cognitive strategies, because I remember that some of you mentioned practice, practice, practice. So this is something that some of you use as well. Now, a cognitive strategy that teachers usually take for granted is note-taking. So what usually happens is that students usually take raw notes, which are not organized, because we don't actually teach them how to take notes in more effective ways. Something to bear in mind is that the focus of note taking should always be on understanding information, not on writing everything accurately. And something else is that it's much more useful if students can organize information while they're taking notes. There are different formats that students can use when they're taking notes. I'd like to talk to you about one of them, which is the T formation. This is what you can see over there on the slide. It's actually similar to the Cornell method, which is quite popular among college students, for example, when they're taking notes in lectures. And how does it work? Well, over there at the top, what students can do is write the title of the reading text, which they're going to take notes on, or if they're going to take notes on a listening text, they can write the number of the audio track at the top, for instance. Now, on the left-hand side, where we can see ingredients needed, equipment needed, what students could do is write the key ideas in the listening or the reading text. And on the right-hand side, where we can see the ingredients and the equipment needed for the banana cake, students can take notes on details related to each main idea. So as you can see, students are not just taking raw notes one below the other, they're actually taking notes in a more organized way, in a way that helps them understand the information they're reading or listening to, okay? Now, something that we also have to remember is that some students or some groups might need help to understand and take notes on key ideas first before they actually move on to taking notes on details regarding each main idea. So this is something you could consider depending on the student, depending on the group. But as I told you, this is one format which we can show students and teach our students to use in class so that they can take notes more effectively. And once again, this is something that we can teach them in our lessons and that they can use in other contexts as well, right? So far, so good, everybody. It's almost 4:30. Let me take a look at the chat box once again. Let me drink some water as well. Tell me if everything's okay, if you have any questions, any problems. Let me see here. Denise, you're asking me, does this work for grammar as well? Are you talking about the semantic map, Denise? Is that what you're referring to? If you're referring to a semantic map, well, I wouldn't say that a semantic map would be the best idea, because when we're talking about a semantic map, we're thinking about the meaning of words or phrases, words and phrases whose meaning is related somehow. If you're thinking about grammar, maybe something else that they could use, maybe a graphic organizer or a mind map, for instance. But when we're talking about a semantic map, we're talking about concepts which are related somehow. Yeah, so usually, as we've mentioned before, we're talking about how we can prepare students for reading, listening activities, speaking and writing as well. If we want them to help, if we want them to remember vocabulary they already know. Yes? Tell me if it makes sense, Denise. Let me take a look at the other messages. Okay, Ingrid, I'll see if it's possible, okay? I'll talk to people from Disal to see if this is a possibility, but this is not a problem for me, okay? The subject in learning is great. Okay. You're talking about the T formation note form. All right. What do you think, everyone? Do you think that this could help students when it comes to grammar? And if so, how? So I'm asking this question to the group now. Let's see what everyone has to say about it. Um, Danilo is saying some students don't take notes, especially online. This is true, yes. But as we mentioned, Danilo, this is something that can help them not only organize information in a different way, but also understand it better. So we can encourage students to use this strategy in our lessons and outside the classroom as well. But of course, students will use specific learning strategies according to their preferences as well, right? So we also have to take them into consideration. Let me see. I'd like to know more about it so that I can teach my students better. Any references that you could suggest? Patricia, I can help you with some references by email. How about that? I don't think we'll have time for that today, but I'll show you my email at the end of the webinar. So please drop me a line so that I can help you with what you asked me here, okay? Eduardo, you do have a good point. It's important for us to consider that these strategies, memory strategies, cognitive strategies, they overlap to a certain extent. So for instance, the semantic map which we've just talked about, can also be used when students are taking notes. This is a possibility as well. And I agree with you. And taking notes can also help students remember information. So when we talk about these different groups, please bear in mind that they overlap, okay? So a strategy might have to do with more than one group, okay? This is a very good point. Let me see. It can help students memorize structure. So people are talking about using the T formation note form to practice grammar. Present perfect on the left, unfinished action, unspecific time on the right. Interesting, Wagner. The word and the part of the sentence and or word family. It's a possibility, definitely. It's not usually to use this format, for example, to learn grammar. At least this is my opinion, but it is a possibility, and we have some interesting suggestions here. Okay, great. Let's move on so that we have time to talk about the other types of strategies as well. But please keep on sharing your ideas, keep on making comments in the chat box, and I'll try to read as many as I can, all right? So the last type of direct strategy, which I'd like to address today, is compensation strategies. So we all know that learners often have gaps in knowledge, gaps regarding vocabulary, for example, sometimes grammar. And these compensation strategies can help our learners understand and produce language despite these limitations. So, having said that, we could say that lower level learners, beginners, elementary students, pre-intermediate students might benefit quite a lot from using compensation strategies. But even higher level students, advanced students, for instance, they might also benefit from using compensation strategies because they might forget a word from time to time or not know how to say something in English, and compensation strategies can help them overcome these limitations from time to time. Now, you can ask me, great, but what is an example of a compensation strategy? Well, one example, and this is something that I mentioned in the article I wrote for the New Roots blog, so you can check it out later as well. One example is using circumlocution or synonyms. So for instance, if I'm having a conversation and I don't know how to say something in English. So instead of resorting to Portuguese, which might not be possible depending on the interlocutor, I could explain what I mean so that what I'm trying to say is conveyed in an indirect way. Another possibility is using a synonym. So by using circumlocution or a synonym, I'm making up for this limitation of mine when it comes to lexis, to my lexical repertoire. Now, can we help students use these strategies? Definitely. And an interesting activity that we can do with our students, and I believe that some of you or many of you might have already used it with your students, is the back to the board activity. So we can divide students into different groups, and we ask one student from each group to sit with his or her back to the board. And on the board, we show them a list of words, which the students looking at the board have to explain or give synonyms for, so that the student who isn't looking at the board can guess what they are. It's possible to do this activity with isolated words, as I've mentioned. If you want to increase the level of difficulty, you can also show them sentences which they need to help their partners guess. And well, from my experience, whenever I did this activity in the classroom, students often enjoyed it, adults and teenagers alike. And what I also found quite useful after doing this activity with them is talking about the relevance of this activity with students. So I would ask them, all right, now what did you do in this activity? Okay, so you gave explanations and you gave synonyms for the words on the board. Is this something that you might have to do outside the classroom? Oh, yes. So we might forget a word, we might not know how to say something. So do you think this strategy is useful? Do you think you could use it in real life? Is it relevant to you? And all of them agreed that it was quite useful. So again, we can help our students with compensation strategies via an activity such as one, but it's always important to raise awareness of the strategies which they are using and how they can be applied to different situations. Does that make sense, everyone? Has anyone used this type of activity before? By the way, is it possible to do this type of activity in remote classes? And if so, how? Do you have any suggestions? Let me take a look at the chat box again. Let's see, Danilo, you're talking about competence here. Well, strategic competence is part of communicative competence, right? And strategic competence has a lot to do with compensation strategies. Is this for any level? Good question, Sergio. I believe that beginners might struggle with this type of activity. They might resort to Portuguese, for instance. So I would say that starting with pre-intermediate students, forwards, for instance, you might this activity might be more successful in the classroom, okay? So when it comes to lower levels, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name here. I would say that maybe encouraging students to use other types of compensation strategies might be interesting. So for instance, before a communicative activity, telling students that it's possible to use body language, for example, to mime words which they don't know how to say, in English. So we can raise awareness of these other possibilities before they start this type of activity in our lesson. And after they perform the task, we can talk about the strategies they used, if they were effective or not. So this is one possibility, okay? That's okay, Marta. Thank you. Eduardo is saying here, you can send the word in private to one student, definitely. So if it's possible for you to create breakout rooms, you can send a list of words or the sentences to specific students in each group so that they can help a different student in each group to guess these words, right? Oh, taboo, Juliana. I love this game. Thank you so much. So taboo is another possibility, another type of activity which involves using compensation strategies. Very nice. Let me see. So we also have some other suggestions here so that we can use this activity with our learners. Great. Wagner did this activity yesterday. Great. Okay. Oh, you used WhatsApp to assign the words. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for all of your contributions. So let's talk a little bit about indirect strategies right now. The first group I showed you before was metacognitive strategies. So, what am I talking about here? Learners can control their own cognition, their own learning process by using metacognitive strategies. They can prevent students from losing focus when they feel overwhelmed by the number of new things they have to learn. And this cognitive overload is something that can happen quite a lot in distance learning. Unfortunately, though, learners don't use metacognitive strategies as much as they should. Now, some of our students, especially beginners, they might need help to organize their schedule so that they find time to study English. Can we help them with that? Yes, we can. How? Well, we could show them a table such as this one you can see over here, or we could even ask them to use Google Calendar on their devices. And what they would have to do is simply fill it in with the activities they usually do during the week, so that when they finish filling in this table, they could see free periods when they could study English. Now, with some students or with some groups, we might even have to go beyond that and address issues such as, well, okay, I'm going to study English on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, but how can I study by myself? I mean, what does it mean when we say, oh, I'm going to study grammar? What are we talking about? What does it mean to say, well, I'm going to study vocabulary? We might have to discuss these questions with our students in class. Once again, especially beginners, elementary learners who are still trying to fit English into their weekly routine. And well, we could ask them to update this table on a weekly basis. We could ask them to do so in class for a couple of times. And after a while, ideally, this will have become something automatic for students. So they will always study English on Saturday mornings, and they won't even have to update the table anymore. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the course, with beginners, elementary learners, this type of activity is something that we could consider doing, at least in some lessons at the beginning of the course, until they get used to spending a specific moment of their day or of the week studying English. All right. Well, let's move on and talk about effective strategies right now, because we still need to talk about the third group of indirect strategies. And I'd also like to have some time for a Q&A at the end. Let's see if it's possible. Now, effective strategies. Well, when we refer to affect, we're talking about the emotions, moods, attitudes, and values that students have which impact language learning. Thankfully, in recent years, the influence of affective factors has become widely recognized, and it's safe to say that we can predict how successful a language learner will be based on how well they can control their own emotions and their own attitudes about learning. This is something that I learned some time ago with a student of mine. She was a beginner, an adult learner, And before she started taking classes, she had no or almost no exposure, little or no exposure to English. So she often struggled in class, and this was something that I could see straight away just by looking at her face. This is something that teachers can do very well, right? Just by looking at some students, we know when things are not going well. So what I did was just talk to her after class, and this is something that I did well quite for a number of times. And what I noticed was that she didn't have a high self-esteem as a language learner. So she didn't feel that she was able to learn the language. She often compared herself to her classmates, and she always felt that she wasn't doing as well as the others. So eventually she dropped out of the course. And I believe that the main reason for that was her low self esteem as a language learner. Now, is there anything that we can do for these students? Is it possible to help them change some of their attitudes towards learning? Is it possible to boost their self-esteem as language learners? I mean, yes, we're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, and some of our learners might have to do therapy, for instance. But there are some things we can do, and effective strategies can come in handy. So one example of an effective strategy is positive statements. So let me show you some examples now. Before we, if students are not familiar with positive statements, we might have to demonstrate some examples first. So let me show you. So one example is, oh, I understood almost everything I heard in class today. Or I'm reading much faster in English now. I took a risk in using new words today. These are more specific statements, but it's also possible to show them more general ones. I'm a good student. I'm making progress in my language learning. I can learn from my mistakes. So after showing them some examples, we can ask them to create cards, for instance, with these statements, and we can even ask them to create their own positive statements. And the idea is that, especially in the beginning, they look at these cards several times a day until students memorize and internalize these positive statements. In our lessons, they could use these cards as well. So before a more challenging activity, or even during a specific activity which they find more challenging, or after a good performance in a specific activity, they could look at these cards so that they could see these positive statements. And if they look at these cards after a good performance, these positive statements also work as a type of self-reward, right? Which is also an effective strategy. So you can consider this effective strategy if you have learners such as the one I described. Once again, we're not therapists, I'm quite aware of that, but and a strategy such as this one can help our students change some of their beliefs, some of their attitudes, and even boost their self-esteem so that they can become more successful learners. Let me look at the chat box very quickly. Marta, yes, Google Forms or Zoom pools at the end of classes. Great. Oh, that's nice, Wagner. Yeah, when it comes to self-reward, I don't know if you agree with me, but I'd say that students often rely on us to give them some type of reward, right? But it's actually much more useful when students are likely to become much more motivated if this type of encouragement and this type of reward comes from themselves, right? And not from somebody else, from an external source. Okay, great. So let's talk about social strategies before we wrap up. We still have 10 minutes. So, well, why social strategies? When we're talking about language, well, language is all about communication, right? So it's only natural that language learning should involve other people. And that's why social strategies are quite relevant as well. Our students need to learn how to cooperate with each other and be encouraged to do so via cooperative activities. Empathy is also necessary for successful communication in any language. Now, one example of a social strategy is simply asking questions. So we can teach our learners to ask for clarification. So, for instance, sorry, I don't understand. What was that again? But also how to ask the interlocutor to speak more slowly, to repeat information, to paraphrase, etc. When it comes to asking for verification, this has to do with checking whether you understood something correctly. So, oh, did you say da da da? And another possibility is asking for correction. So this can happen when students are speaking to more proficient users of the language, or when they are writing something. Why not ask for correction? They can learn a lot from that. Now, teaching these questions to students, in my case, proved to be invaluable when some teachers and I organized get-togethers at this language institute that I used to work for. So learners would have to interact with students at different levels. So we'd ask a basic 1 group to talk to a basic 2 group. And as you can imagine, beginners often felt quite insecure and anxious before these get-togethers started. So these questions, so asking for clarification, asking for verification, asking for correction, etc., along with others to help students keep the conversation going, they help beginners and elementary learners feel much more prepared. But at the same time, asking questions was also relevant to higher level students because they had to make sure that the lower level students understood what they were trying to say in the conversation. So asking, can you understand what I'm saying? Or do you need me to slow down? Was also important for these students. Now, once again, after the activity was over, we often discussed with our students how the activity went, if they think that this strategy, asking questions, was something that they could use in real life, and they all agreed that yes, it was quite relevant because we know that we cannot control the level of the people we are interacting with. So we might have to speak to people who are beginning to learn the language, but we might also have to interact with native speakers, for example, when asking questions was something that helped them feel more prepared for these other situations. And as I mentioned, even higher level students could appreciate the relevance of talking about these questions and practicing them before the activity started, because they knew that they were also responsible for keeping the conversation going and making sure that the other students who hadn't studied English for as long as they had were able to keep up with the conversation. So have let me see. Let me take a look at the time here. Okay, so it's 4:55 now. We're reaching the end of the webinar, but please tell me about any questions you have or any comments, anything you would like to address, how the webinar was able to help you or not. Please tell me some of your thoughts. Let me take a look here. So Alex is talking about motivation here, something we've mentioned. Oh, thank you, Wagner. Collaboration and communication, teamwork. So I believe you're referring to social strategies here, right? Um, Great. Oh, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, everybody. Ah, great, Wagner. I like your suggestion, huh? Let's see if it's possible. Okay. I do that in my outdoor classes. Your outdoor classes, interesting, Eduardo. I take my students to a mall, for example. That's great, huh? Great. Using real life situation is the best way to get them to learn. Oh, definitely. So I would say that this is something worth doing after asking students, as I mentioned, to use different strategies in our lesson. So why is this relevant? When can we use this outside the classroom, right? Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Andre, Patricia. Reinforces the concepts that students can make mistakes, of course, and the classroom is a safe place for that. So, in a way, we're also helping them with effective strategies, right? Definitely. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your feedback. Okay, Fabiana, thank you so much. Okay, good luck, Carla. Good luck with remote teaching. Great, everybody. Thank you so much. So let me share my email with you. If you want to talk to me about any issues which we talked about today, this is my email. So please drop me a line. I'll be more than happy to answer your emails. And if you if you want to check the video later, or I believe that some people had to leave the webinar a bit early, it'll be available on YouTube as well. Okay, so don't forget to check us on Instagram so that you can see events which are around the corner at Troika. Thank you so much for your comments, your participation. I had a blast talking to you about this topic today, and I hope you feel more confident in raising your students' awareness of learning strategies, how they can use them outside the classroom, and how they can become better learners. Uh, how they can become better learners when using these learning strategies. As for the certificate, Carmen, the certificates will be sent to you, okay? So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week and hope to see you in the future as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.